The morning bell rang across the Galactic Academy, and hundreds of young cadets from different worlds walked into the main cafeteria. The room was huge, with silver walls that sparkled under bright white lights. Long tables stretched from one end to the other, and each table had meal dispensers that could create food for any species in the galaxy. Doyan walked slowly behind a group of tall blue aliens who were talking in their strange musical language. He was the only human in his class, and most of the other cadets still stared at him like he was some kind of weird animal from a zoo. His black hair was messy from sleep, and his academy uniform was wrinkled. But he did not care much about looking perfect like the other students. At Table 7, the Vexery cadet named Thielen was showing off his shiny silver scales to a group of female cadets from the water world of Aquinas. His scales changed colors when he was happy, and right now they were bright green because the girls were laughing at his jokes. Thielen thought he was the best-looking cadet in the whole academy, and he loved when others agreed with him. Near the windows, a group of insect-like aliens called Cracti were buzzing and clicking as they talked about their morning flight training. Their leader was a female named Zira, who had 4 arms and wings that made rainbow patterns in the light. She was known for being very smart and very serious about following all the academy rules. The meal dispensers started working at exactly 8 in the morning, and cadets lined up to get their food. Each dispenser could read the biology of whoever stood in front of it and then create the perfect meal for that species. The Vexery got liquid proteins that tasted like sweet metals. The Cracti got sugar cubes that dissolved on their tongues. The water aliens got something that looked like blue soup but smelled like ocean flowers. Everything was normal until Thielen pressed his hand on the scanner and waited for his breakfast. Instead of the usual silver liquid, a thick green substance came out of the machine. It dripped slowly and made wet plopping sounds as it hit his tray. The smell was terrible, like old eggs mixed with garbage that had been sitting in the sun for weeks. Thielen jumped back, and his scales turned bright red, which meant he was scared or angry. His tray clattered to the floor, and the green stuff spread across the metal surface. Other cadets started gathering around to see what was wrong. The Cracti cadets buzzed loudly and backed away from the mess. Their wings flapped nervously, and Zira started talking very fast in her clicking language. More cadets tried the dispensers, and the same thing happened. Every machine was producing food that looked rotten and smelled worse. The crystalline aliens from Zereth made high-pitched ringing sounds that meant they were upset. The gas creatures from Nebula started changing colors from their normal blue to a sick-looking yellow. Instructor Vex-High heard the noise and came rushing over. She was 8 feet tall and made of living crystal that changed colors when she moved. Her species was very old and very wise, and all the cadets respected her when she saw the green mess on the floor. Her crystal body turned dark purple, which was not a good sign. The dispensers are malfunctioning, she announced in her deep voice that echoed around the cafeteria. All cadets must return to their dormitories while we fix this problem. No one should eat anything until further notice. The alien cadets started to panic. Some of them had not eaten since the day before, and their species needed food every few hours to stay healthy. The Aquinas cadets started making worried, bubbling sounds, and their skin turned pale blue. The Cracti were flying in small circles and bumping into each other, but Doyan just stood there looking calm and a little bit amused. While everyone else was getting upset, he walked over to his personal storage locker that was built into the wall near table 12. The other cadets watched him with curiosity as he entered his code and opened the metal door inside the locker. Was something that made no sense to the alien cadets. It looked like a primitive container made of some kind of organic material, not the advanced storage systems they were used to. Doyan pulled it out and set it on the nearest table, then opened the lid without any fear or hesitation. The smell that came out was incredible. It was strong and sharp and unlike anything the alien cadets had ever experienced. It was not the clean odor of properly processed food or the neutral scent of energy cubes. It was wild and complex and somehow alive inside. The container were chunks of what looked like deliberately spoiled organic matter. The pieces were dark red and brown with white spots that looked like some kind of infection or disease. They were wrapped in what appeared to be intestines from some unknown creature. The whole thing looked like it had been rotting for months. Several alien cadets actually fell over. The Vexery named Thielen made choking sounds and his scales turned gray, which meant he was about to be sick. 3 of the Cracti fainted and hit the floor with loud buzzing. Crashes the Aquinas. Cadets started backing toward the exits while making emergency calls on their communication device. Doyen reached into his bag and pulled out something flat and round that looked like it had been baked in an oven. He tore off a piece and placed some of the dark chunks on top of it. Then he added some green paste that smelled even stronger than the meat. The combination of smells made the air in the cafeteria thick and heavy. As he took his first bite, the remaining alien cadets pressed themselves against the walls and stared at him in complete horror and disbelief. Do-yun chewed slowly and smiled like he was enjoying the most delicious meal in the universe. He took another bite, and then another while the aliens watched in shocked silence. Instructor Vex High pushed through the crowd of frightened cadets. Her crystal body was now flashing between purple and red, which meant she was both confused and alarmed. She had seen many strange things in her 300 years of life, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Cadet, she said in her commanding voice, what toxic substance are you consuming? You must stop immediately before it causes permanent damage to your biological systems. Do-yun looked up at her with some food still in his mouth and swallowed before answering. It is not toxic, instructor. It is called aged salami. My grandmother made it for me before I left Earth. Humans have been preserving meat this way for thousands of years. The words hit the assembled cadets like an energy blast. Humans deliberately spoiled their food. The species that had recently joined the Galactic Federation was eating decomposed organic matter on purpose. The revelation was so shocking that even Instructor Vex High stood frozen for several seconds, but Do-yun was not finished. He reached into his container again and pulled out more food. This time it was something white and moldy that looked like it had been infected with every disease in the galaxy. The smell made several more cadets run for the exits. This is cheese, he explained calmly. The mold makes it taste better. Humans also bury food underground for years before eating it. We call it aging. The cafeteria erupted in chaos as the alien cadets finally understood what they were witnessing. They were not just looking at spoiled food, they were watching a member of a species that had turned decay into cuisine. What kind of beings had their academy accepted? What other horrors were hiding in the human sections of the ship? As Do-yun continued eating his breakfast with obvious pleasure, the alien cadets began to wonder if they were safe sharing a space station with creatures who considered poison to be food. After the chaos in the cafeteria ended, most of the alien cadets could not stop thinking about what they had seen. Do-yun eating his strange decomposed food like it was normal had shaken them to their core. They gathered in small groups throughout the academy, whispering about the human and his toxic breakfast style in the vexery. Cadet was still pale, and his scales had not returned to their normal silver color. He kept touching his throat and making gagging sounds every few minutes. His friends tried to comfort him, but he could not forget the smell of that rotting meat. The image was burned into his memory like a bad dream that would not go away. Zera, the Cracti leader, called an emergency meeting of all non-human cadets in the study hall. Her forearms gestured wildly as she spoke to the crowd of frightened aliens. We must investigate this human further, she announced in her clicking voice. What if there are more dangerous substances in his living quarters? What if he is planning to poison the entire academy? The idea spread through the group like wildfire. Soon dozens of cadets were convinced that Do-yun was some kind of biological weapon sent to destroy them. They imagined his dormitory filled with toxic chemicals and deadly bacteria waiting to be released into the air system. Snalax, a Zephyrion cadet with 4 large eyes that could see in multiple dimensions, volunteered to lead a scouting mission. His species was known for being very brave and very curious about other life forms. He had been studying humans since they joined the galactic community, and he wanted to understand what made them so different. That afternoon, when Do-yun was attending his engineering class, a group of 20 alien cadets followed Nalox through the dormitory corridors. They moved quietly like spies on a secret mission. Their hearts were beating fast, and their various breathing organs were working overtime from nervousness. The human dormitory section looked exactly like all the other living quarters from the outside. Same metal walls, same electronic door locks, same air filtration systems. But when Nalox used his security override code to open Doyun's door, they discovered something that defied all logic and reason. The room was clean, but not in the sterile way that alien quarters were maintained. There were no UV sterilizers humming in the corners, no atmospheric purifiers cleaning every molecule of air, no electromagnetic fields destroying harmful bacteria instead. There were strange organic decorations and what looked like primitive furniture made from dead trees, but the real shock came when they saw the corner of the room where Doyun kept his food storage system. It was unlike anything in their advanced civilizations. Instead of a standard molecular preservation unit, there was a small primitive box that seemed to encourage bacterial growth rather than prevent it. Nalox approached the device carefully, his 4 eyes scanning for any obvious traps or warning signs. The other cadets hung back near the door, ready to run if something dangerous happened. When he opened the food storage unit, the smell that escaped made half the group immediately flee into the hallway. Inside were compartments containing what could only be described as controlled decay. There were round wheels of white substance covered in fuzzy blue and green growths that pulsed with life. There were glass containers filled with dark liquid that had chunks of unknown matter floating in it, like some kind of scientific experiment gone wrong. The most terrifying sight was meat hanging from small hooks in conditions that seemed designed for maximum bacterial development. The temperature was not cold enough to prevent spoilage, and the humidity levels were perfect for growing every kind of harmful organism. The alien cadets could not understand how any living being could create such conditions on purpose. "This cannot be real," whispered Safia, an Aquanis cadet whose pale blue skin had turned almost white with fear. Her species kept all food in quantum stasis fields that prevented any molecular change for thousands of years. The idea of deliberately aging food was like suggesting they should breathe poison instead of air. Nalox forced himself to examine the storage unit more closely. His species had evolved on a world where any contamination meant death, so everything about this human food system went against his deepest instincts. But he was also a scientist, and he needed to understand what he was seeing. The human has created multiple environments for different stages of decomposition. He reported to the group in a shaking voice. Some of these substances appear to be weeks old, others look like they have been developing bacterial cultures for months or even years. The revelation that humans not only tolerated decay, but actually cultivated its scent. Waves of shock through the assembled cadets. They had thought the breakfast incident was just one strange meal, but now they realized it was part of a much larger and more terrifying pattern. Crix, a gaseous nebulite who existed as a cloud of intelligent particles, started changing colors rapidly from blue to yellow to red, which meant he was experiencing extreme emotional distress. His voice came out as a series of musical tones that translated to panic and confusion. "Wait, there is more," Nalox announced as he continued his investigation. He had found a datapad next to the food storage unit and was reading through what appeared to be human food preparation instructions. "The others tell me that back on Earth, humans store food in underground chambers called root cellars. They bury containers in dirt and leave them for years before consuming the contents." The idea hit the alien cadets like a physical blow. Underground storage meant contact with soil, bacteria, fungus, and countless other contaminants that their species spent enormous resources avoiding. Their homeworlds had eliminated such practices millions of years ago as part of basic civilization development. They also aged beverages in underground caves for decades. Nalox continued reading. His voice was getting higher with each new revelation. "Some humans consider food better the longer it has been contaminated. These caves are specifically designed to encourage interaction with naturally occurring organisms." Several more cadets fled the room, unable to handle these revelations. The remaining ones stood frozen, trying to process information that challenged everything they knew about food safety and survival. Their advanced civilizations had spent millennia perfecting sterile food production, while humans seemed to embrace contamination as if it were beneficial. The most shocking discovery came when Nalox found images on the datapad showing massive underground storage facilities on Earth. Thousands of humans worked in these contaminated environments, handling aged products with their bare hands, not only surviving, but appearing healthy and happy. Thailand, who had been quiet since the morning, finally spoke up in a voice barely above a whisper. "If humans can survive eating deliberate contamination, What else can they tolerate? What if their entire species has adapted to thrive in conditions that would kill the rest of us? The question hung in the air like a dark cloud as the alien cadets began to understand. They might be dealing with something far beyond their comprehension. They had assumed humans were a primitive species that had somehow stumbled into space travel, but what if they were actually the ultimate survivors, beings who had conquered their planet by making friends with the very forces that other species feared most? As they quietly left Doyun's room and returned to their own sterile quarters, the alien cadets could not shake the feeling that they had just glimpsed something that would change their understanding of life itself. The human was not just eating spoiled food, he was demonstrating mastery over decay itself. That night, as they tried to sleep in their perfectly clean and sanitized dormitories, the alien cadets wondered what other secrets the humans were hiding. What other impossible survival skills had they developed while the rest of the galaxy was building sterile civilizations, and most importantly, were they safe sharing a space station with beings who treated biological warfare as a cooking method? Nighttime at the Galactic Academy was usually very peaceful. The dormitory levels became quiet except for the gentle humming of life support systems and the soft glowing of emergency lights in the corridors. Most cadets followed strict sleep schedules because proper rest was essential for their species' health and mental performance. But this night was different. After discovering Doyun's food storage system, the alien cadets could not relax. Their minds kept racing with terrible thoughts about contamination and bacterial warfare. Several of them had contacted their homeworlds asking for advice about how to handle a potentially dangerous situation. In Dormitory Section C, where most of the non-human cadets lived, the atmosphere was tense and fearful. Thielen had installed 3 additional air filtering units in his room and was wearing a breathing mask. Even though the academy air was perfectly safe, his silver scales kept changing colors from worry, and he jumped at every small sound. Jira, the Crafty leader, was flying nervous circles around her room, unable to settle on any surface. Her forearms kept twitching and her wings made anxious buzzing sounds. She had studied every database entry about human biology but found no explanation for how they could survive eating toxic substances. Down the hall, Sophie, the Aquinas cadet, had sealed herself inside her moisture chamber and cranked the purification systems to maximum power. The blue-tinted water that kept her skin healthy was being filtered and refiltered every few minutes. She could not stop imagining deadly bacteria floating through the air vents in the gaseous dormitories. Crix had compressed himself into the smallest possible form and activated every containment field. He could find his particle cloud was flashing different colors as his emotional state shifted between fear, anger, and confusion. He kept thinking about those underground caves where humans aged their food in dirt 3 floors down in the human section. Doyun was getting ready for bed just like any normal night. He had finished his homework, completed his equipment maintenance, and checked his messages from home. The aged salami and cheese from lunch had been delicious, and his stomach felt comfortable and satisfied. He brushed his teeth with a simple mechanical brush, not the sonic sterilization systems that other species used. Then he put on soft sleeping clothes made from natural fibers instead of the antimicrobial synthetic materials preferred by most academy cadets. His room was kept at a comfortable temperature with normal humidity levels. As Doyun climbed into his bed, the alien cadets were monitoring his vital signs through the academy sensors. They had convinced themselves that someone needed to watch for signs of poisoning or biological breakdown. They expected to see elevated heart rate, increased brain activity, or other symptoms of systemic contamination. Instead, they saw something that made no sense at all. Doyun's biological readings were completely normal. His heart beat steadily at a healthy rate. His brain activity showed the regular patterns of someone falling asleep peacefully. His digestive system was processing food without any sign of distress or toxin response. This is impossible, whispered Nalox as he stared at the medical readouts in the monitoring room. His 4 eyes were focused on different screens showing every aspect of the human's condition. According to our science, he should be experiencing organ failure. By now, the other cadets crowded around the displays trying to understand what they were seeing. The human had consumed what appeared to be biological weapons for breakfast and lunch, yet his body was functioning as if everything was perfectly normal. It defied every principle of biology they had been taught. Then they heard something even more disturbing coming through the audio sensors. Doyon was not just sleeping peacefully, he was actually snoring. The sound was deep and relaxed, like someone enjoying the most comfortable rest of their life. It was the sound of a being completely at peace with the world. Thailand started hyperventilating and his scales turned bright yellow. How can he be sleeping? The Vexery cadet gasped. He consumed enough bacterial toxins to kill a dozen cracktee. Why is his body not rejecting the contamination? Why is he not suffering? The questions multiplied as the night went on. Every few minutes, the alien cadets checked the sensors, expecting to see signs of the human's immune system fighting off the deadly substances he had eaten, but instead they saw only the steady rhythms of deep, healthy sleep around midnight. Sophie started developing a new theory. What if humans are not actually alive in the way we understand life? She suggested through the inter-room communication system. What if they are some kind of undead species that feeds on decay and corruption? The idea spread quickly through the dormitory sections. It would explain how Doyon could consume rotting matter and sleep peacefully afterward. If humans were already dead, then bacterial contamination would not affect them the same way it affected living beings. They might actually require decomposing organic matter to maintain their undead statecrics. Expanded his particle cloud in excitement, creating colorful patterns as he processed this new possibility. That would make them the perfect infiltrators. He communicated to the others. They could pretend to be a normal species while slowly spreading contamination throughout the galaxy. As the hours passed and Doyon continued sleeping soundly, the alien cadets became more convinced that they were dealing with something beyond their understanding. Some began composing emergency messages to their home governments warning about the dangerous species that had been admitted to the academy. By 3 in the morning, several cadets had started packing their belongings. They wanted to request emergency transfers before the human could contaminate more areas of the station. Others were researching quarantine procedures and biological warfare protocols. Snolox remained at the monitoring station watching the humans' vital signs with scientific fascination. Every measurement indicated perfect health and peaceful rest. It was as if consuming toxic substances had actually improved Doyon's physical condition rather than harming it. Near dawn, something even stranger happened. Doyon started having what appeared to be pleasant dreams. His brain activity showed patterns associated with happiness and contentment. His body temperature was ideal, and his breathing was deep and regular. He was experiencing the kind of restorative sleep that most beings only achieved under perfect conditions. The alien cadets stared at each other in growing horror. They had spent the entire night terrified and sleepless, while the human who had consumed biological weapons was having the best rest of his life. Whatever species they were dealing with was so adapted to contamination that it actually helped them sleep better. As morning approached, the exhausted alien cadets realized they faced a terrible choice. They could report their discoveries to the academy administrators and risk being labeled as paranoid, or they could try to handle the human threat themselves. Before they could decide what to do, they heard new sounds coming from the human dormitory section. Doyon was waking up, and from the sound of it, he was preparing to eat breakfast. The alien cadets looked at each other with fresh terror, wondering what new horrors the human would consume to start his day. They had survived one night of watching him sleep peacefully after eating poison, but they were not sure they could handle seeing him do it again. The morning bell rang across the academy, signaling the start of another day. As alien cadets emerged from their sleepless night looking haggard and frightened, they all had the same thought running through their minds. If humans could sleep like babies after consuming deadly bacteria, what other impossible things were they capable of doing? Dawn brought no relief to the exhausted alien cadets who had spent the entire night monitoring the human and jumping at every sound. Their species evolved on worlds where sleep was essential for survival, and going without rest made them weak and confused, but their fear of contamination was stronger than their need for sleep. The morning announcements echoed through the dormitory sections as academy systems came online. Lights gradually brightened to simulate natural sunrise in the air. Circulation increased to provide fresh atmosphere for the new day for most cadets. This was a pleasant and energizing routine, but today it filled them with dread. Thailand emerged from his room looking terrible. His silver scales were dull and patchy. His eyes were red from strain, and his usually perfect posture was slumped with exhaustion. He had spent hours checking and rechecking his air filters, convinced that human bacteria were spreading through the ventilation system down the hall. Zira stumbled out of her quarters and immediately flew into the wall. Her wings were not coordinating properly, and her forearms kept reaching for things that were not there. The cracty species needed 8 hours of suspended flight sleep every night, and she had gotten none. Sophie looked even worse as she struggled to exit her moisture chamber. The blue tint of her skin had faded to a sickly gray color, and she was leaving wet footprints on the floor. Because her water recycling system had been working overtime, her species became dehydrated quickly. Without proper rest cycles throughout the dormitory sections, dozens of alien cadets wandered into the corridors looking like survivors of some terrible disaster. They had dark circles under their eyes. Their various biological systems were functioning poorly, and they all shared the same expression of exhausted terror. But from the human section came sounds that made their hearts race with new fear. They could hear Do-yun moving around his room, and it sounded like he was preparing for a normal morning. He was humming a cheerful tune that echoed through the metal walls, and his footsteps were light and energetic. The alien cadets gathered in the common area near the human dormitory section, drawn by horrified curiosity and the need to protect each other from whatever fresh nightmare was about to unfold. They huddled together like frightened animals, waiting for a predator to emerge from its lair. Nilux positioned himself near the wall where he could use his 4 eyes to monitor multiple angles at once. His species' survival instincts were screaming warnings, but his scientific mind demanded that he observe and record everything that happened. The other cadets looked to him for leadership, even though he felt just as lost and afraid as they did. The sound of Do-yun's door opening made everyone freeze in place. They watched as the human walked into the common area, looking refreshed and alert. His hair was neatly combed. His academy uniform was clean and pressed, and he had the healthy glow of someone who had enjoyed perfect sleep. "Good morning, everyone," Do-yun said with a friendly smile that made the alien cadets cringe. He seemed completely unaware of the terror he had caused, or the fact that dozens of beings had spent the night fearing for their lives. His casual attitude was somehow more frightening than if he had been obviously dangerous. The human walked to a food preparation area that was shared by all dormitory residents. Most cadets used it for simple tasks like heating pre-processed meals or mixing nutritional supplements. But Do-yun began removing items from his personal storage that made the watching aliens gasp in horror. First came containers that looked like they had been buried underground for months. The metal was stained with what appeared to be rust and organic matter, and strange smells began filling the air as soon as they were opened. Inside were objects that defied all logic and food safety principles. "These are eggs," Do-yun announced cheerfully as he held up oval-shaped items that looked ancient beyond measure. "My family sent them from our farm in Jeju. They have been aged for 2 months without any refrigeration, which makes them much more flavorful than fresh ones." The alien cadets pressed themselves against the walls as they realized the human was about to consume reproductive cells that had been deliberately contaminated. The eggs were darker than they should be, and some had visible cracks that could have allowed any number of deadly organisms inside. A Do-yun cracked the first egg into a heating device, and immediately the most incredible smell filled the common area. It was sharp and sulfurous, like the volcanic vents on dead worlds mixed with organic decay. The alien cadets activated their emergency breathing systems and several ran for the exits, but the horror was just beginning. The human then produced what appeared to be concentrated fat from some unknown animal and began heating it in the same container. The combination of aged eggs and animal fat created an atmosphere so thick and overwhelming that the air recycling system started working at maximum capacity as the mixture cooked. Do-yun hummed happily and stirred the contents with obvious pleasure. The eggs turned from liquid to solid but maintained their unnatural dark color. The fat made bubbling and popping sounds that reminded the watching aliens of biological warfare demonstrations they had seen in their defense classes. Then came the final nightmare. Do-yun retrieved what looked like plant matter that had been processed into flat rectangles, but these rectangles were covered with spots of blue and green growth. that pulsed with life. The contamination was so advanced that some spots had fuzzy extensions reaching into the air. Just a little mold, the human said casually as he examined the infected plant matter. It actually adds extra flavor and nutrients. My grandmother always said the more colorful the bread, the better it tastes. The watching aliens could not process what they were seeing. The human was about to consume plant matter that was so contaminated it could serve as a biological weapon. Yet he was treating it like a delicacy. He actually seemed to prefer the contaminated version over clean food. Now Lox tried to speak but only managed a choking sound. His scientific training told him that what he was witnessing was impossible. No known species could survive consuming such concentrated bacterial warfare, yet the human seemed to thrive on it. Doyun placed the moldy bread in the heating device alongside his eggs and fat. The combination created new smells that were beyond the alien cadets' ability to describe. Their various respiratory systems were working overtime trying to filter out what they perceived as deadly toxins. When the food finished cooking, Doyun placed everything on a plate and sat down to eat with obvious enjoyment. He took large bites, chewed slowly to savor the flavors, and even made small sounds of pleasure as he consumed what should have been his final meal. The alien cadets watched in fascinated terror as he ate every bite without showing any signs of distress. His vital signs remained perfectly normal according to their scanning devices, and he looked healthier and more energetic with each swallow. This cannot be real, whispered Thielen, whose scales had turned completely white with shock. He is consuming biological weapons for breakfast and acting like it is the most normal thing in the galaxy. What kind of species are we dealing with? As Doyun finished his meal and began cleaning up the preparation area, the alien cadets realized they were witnessing something that challenged every scientific principle they had been taught. Either their entire understanding of biology was wrong, or humans represented something so far beyond normal life that existing categories no longer applied. The human thanked them for sharing the common area and walked back to his room to prepare for morning classes. His cheerful attitude and normal behavior somehow made the entire experience more terrifying than if he had been obviously alien or threatening. Left alone in the common area that still smelled like biological warfare, the alien cadets looked at each other with the same thought running through their minds. If humans could start their day by consuming concentrated contamination and remain perfectly healthy, what other impossible survival skills did they possess? Word of the breakfast incident spread throughout the academy faster than quantum communication. Students from hundreds of worlds gathered to hear descriptions of what the witnesses had seen, and each retelling made the story more terrifying. Some cadets started packing emergency supplies while others began researching transfer procedures to different academies. By midday, the entire non-human student body was convinced they were sharing their educational facility with beings who defied the basic laws of biology, and the administration was beginning to receive worried communications from dozens of homeworlds demanding explanations about the dangerous species that had infiltrated their children's sacred learning environment. By afternoon, the panic about Doyun had spread beyond the dormitory sections and infected the entire Galactic Academy like a quantum virus. Students from hundreds of different worlds were abandoning their classes to gather in groups and share increasingly wild theories about the human and his dangerous eating habits. The main assembly hall buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages as cadets from every corner of the galaxy tried to understand what they were dealing with. Tall crystalline beings from the Zereth system stood next to floating gas clouds from Nebula Prime, while insectoid warriors from the hive worlds clicked their mandibles nervously. In one corner, a group of aquatic students had set up portable water chambers so they could participate in the emergency discussions without drying out. Their pale blue skin flickered with bioluminescent patterns that meant extreme agitation, and their gill slits worked rapidly as they processed the frightening information. Near the main entrance, slug-like beings from the garden worlds left trails of worried slime as they moved between different conversation groups. Their species had evolved to detect chemical contamination from great distances, and they kept insisting they could smell death following the human wherever he went. Mechanical students from the Tech Coalition had formed a perfect circle and were sharing data. Through direct electromagnetic connections, their optical sensors flashed in rapid patterns. As they calculated the probability that humans were some form of biological weapon disguised as an intelligent species high above everyone else on the elevated platforms. Designed for flying species, the bird-like Aryan cadets spread their colorful wings and called to each other in musical voices that translated as warnings and distress calls. Their songs echoed through the assembly hall, creating an atmosphere of barely controlled panic. At exactly 1400 hours, Academy Administrator Prinketh Zara entered the hall, and the massive room fell silent. Her species was ancient and respected throughout the galaxy as master scientists and philosophers. She stood 12 feet tall with skin that looked like living metal and eyes that could see across multiple dimensions. Students of the Academy, she began in her voice that seemed to come from the walls themselves. We have received disturbing reports about cultural misunderstandings involving our human exchange student. These reports have caused unnecessary fear, and we must address them immediately. A wave of nervous energy passed through the assembled students as hundreds of different species shifted uncomfortably in their various seating arrangements. The mechanical beings made small clicking sounds, the gaseous students changed colors rapidly, and the aquatic cadets created small whirlpools in their water chambers. Dr. Keth Zara activated the main holographic display system and began showing images from Earth that made the entire assembly gasp in horror. The first image showed massive underground chambers carved into rock where thousands of containers sat, aging in darkness. It looked like some kind of massive burial ground for contaminated materials. These are called wine cellars, the administrator explained as students throughout the hall made sounds of distress and disbelief. Humans deliberately store fermented plant juices in underground caves for decades before consuming them. They believe the longer the contamination process continues, the better the final product becomes. The next image showed humans working in these contaminated environments without any protective equipment. They were handling containers that had been exposed to soil, bacteria, fungus, and countless other organisms that civilized species spent enormous resources to avoid. The humans appeared healthy and happy as they worked with these biological hazards, but this is not the extent of their contamination practices. Dr. Keth Zara continued as more horrifying images appeared on the display. Here we see facilities where humans encourage bacterial growth in milk products to create substances they call cheese. Some varieties are aged for years until they develop extensive mold colonies. The assembly hall erupted in panic as students saw close-up images of cheese covered in fuzzy growths that looked like alien parasites. Several species had evolved to fear mold above all other threats, and seeing humans deliberately cultivate it was like watching someone play with nuclear weapons. The administrator showed more images of human food preparation that challenged everything they assembled. Students thought they knew about survival. There were pictures of meat hanging in conditions designed for maximum bacterial development, vegetables buried in salt to encourage fermentation, and fruits left to rot until they became alcoholic. Each new revelation sent waves of shock through different species groups. The crystalline beings made high-pitched ringing sounds that meant they were experiencing system overload. The insectoid warriors started flying in agitated circles, and several of the more delicate species actually fainted and had to be carried out by medical drones. Perhaps most disturbing of all, Dr. Keth Zara announced, were the reports from Earth nutritionists about human digestive systems. According to their research, humans have evolved to work in partnership with trillions of bacteria that live inside their bodies. These microorganisms help them break down and extract nutrients from almost any organic matter. The idea that humans were walking colonies of bacteria struck the assembly like an energy weapon. Different species processed this information in different ways. Some saw it as proof that humans were biological weapons. Others thought it meant they were actually superorganisms made up of billions of tiny life forms. The mechanical students calculated that each human contained more bacterial cells than their own mechanical components. The gaseous beings realized that humans were essentially living clouds like themselves, but made of solid matter and microorganisms instead of intelligent particles. When Dr. Keth Zara showed video recordings of human families gathering to share meals that included aged cheeses, fermented vegetables and meat that had been deliberately contaminated the assembly. Reached peak chaos. Students from species that had never agreed on anything before were united. In their terror of human dining practices, the final revelation came when the administrator displayed research from human space exploration programs showing how human colonists had survived on hostile worlds by using their food preservation techniques. They had established successful settlements on planets where other species required massive technological support just to avoid contamination, while our civilizations developed advanced sterilization technology and molecular food processing. Humans were learning to harness decay itself as a survival tool, Dr. Zara explained. This has given them advantages in environments where our technology fails. They can literally bury food in alien soil and dig it up later as nutrition. The assembled students began to understand that they were not dealing with a primitive species that had stumbled into space travel. They were looking at representatives of a civilization that had turned biological warfare into an art form and had survived by making friends with the very forces that other species spent their entire evolutionary history trying to avoid. Emergency communication devices started activating throughout the assembly hall as students received messages from their home governments demanding immediate reports about the human situation. Some worlds were already discussing quarantine procedures while others wanted to study human contamination resistance for military applications. As the cultural exchange presentation ended and students began filing out of the assembly hall, the conversations had changed from panic about contamination to awe about survival abilities. The humans were no longer seen as dangerous primitives, but as ultimate survivors who had mastered the art of thriving in conditions that would kill anyone else. Dr. Zara watched the students leave with satisfaction in her multidimensional eyes. The panic was far from over, but now it was mixed with respect and scientific curiosity. The Academy had survived its first major cultural crisis, and the human exchange program would continue, but with much more careful monitoring and many more safety protocols. That evening, as alien cadets returned to their dormitories, they found emergency supplies waiting for them along with upgraded air filtration systems and bacterial detection equipment. The Academy administration was taking no chances with human contamination procedures, even if they were beginning to understand that humans might be more ally than enemy. But the most important change was in how the students looked at Do-Yun when they saw him in the corridors. He was no longer just the strange human who ate rotten food. He was a representative of a species so tough and adaptable that they had turned the galaxy's most feared biological processes into everyday cooking techniques. And that realization was both terrifying and impressive in equal measure. 3 days after Dr. Zara's presentation, the crisis at the Galactic Academy reached its breaking point. Despite the administrator's explanations, fear continued spreading through the student body like a plague. Many alien parents were demanding their children be removed from what they saw as a contaminated environment. The emergency council chamber filled with representatives from 12 major galactic civilizations, all demanding answers about human food safety protocols. The Vexery delegation arrived in full environmental suits, while the Crakti representatives refused to land their ships anywhere near the Academy station. High Chancellor Moore Vex presided over the emergency session with obvious frustration etched into his ancient crystalline features. His species had maintained peace between thousands of worlds for millennia, but they had never faced a crisis based on food preparation techniques. The human exchange program must be suspended immediately, declared Ambassador Thizes of the Zephyrian Council. Her 4 eyes glowed with determination as she addressed the assembly. Our children are being exposed to biological warfare disguised as nutrition. We demand immediate quarantine procedures. Similar demands came from representatives of every major civilization. The Aquinas wanted all human students isolated in sterile environments. The Tech Coalition suggested studying humans as potentially dangerous weapons. The Nebula Collective proposed banning human food from all galactic facilities. But High Chancellor Moore Vex had been receiving other communications that painted a very different picture. Earth scientists, nutritionists, and survival experts had been sending detailed explanations of human food culture along with historical data about human exploration and colonization efforts. Perhaps Chancellor Moravec announced to the assembled delegates, "We should hear directly from human experts before making decisions that could affect interspecies relations for generations." The council chamber fell silent as delegates considered this proposal. Dr. Sarah Kim appeared on the main holographic display speaking from the Human Nutrition Institute on Earth. She was a small woman with graying hair and kind eyes, but her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades studying human biology and survival. "I understand your concerns about our food preservation techniques," she began calmly, "but I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about how human digestive systems work. We have not evolved to simply tolerate contamination, we have evolved to require it for optimal health." The alien delegates shifted nervously in their various seating arrangements as Dr. Kim continued her explanation. She showed detailed scans of human digestive systems revealing complex ecosystems of beneficial bacteria that help break down food and extract nutrients. Humans carry approximately 100 trillion beneficial microorganisms in their bodies. She explained these bacteria are not parasites or contaminants, they are essential partners that allow us to digest plant matter, extract vitamins, and protect against harmful organisms. The revelation that humans were essentially walking ecosystems struck the assembled delegates with varying degrees of shock. Some species saw it as confirmation of their worst fears, while others began to understand they were witnessing an entirely different approach to survival. Dr. Kim showed historical records of human exploration dating back thousands of years, demonstrating how food preservation techniques had enabled their species to cross oceans, explore frozen continents, and eventually reach the stars, while other civilizations developed technology to create sterile environments. Humans learned to work with natural processes, but the real shock came when she revealed data about human space exploration programs over the past 3 centuries. Human colonies had been established on worlds that other species considered uninhabitable. They had thrived in environments where advanced civilizations required massive technological support. Our fermentation techniques allow us to create nutritious food from local plant matter on almost any world. She explained, "We can establish sustainable colonies with minimal technological infrastructure, while other species need complex supply chains and sterile processing facilities." The implications began dawning on the assembled delegates. Human food techniques were not primitive contamination procedures, they were advanced survival technology disguised as simple cooking. Their ability to eat aged and fermented foods meant they could survive in situations where other species would starve. Commander Park Jin-ho of the Human Space Force appeared on a secondary display speaking from a frontier colony world that other species had declared too hostile for settlement. Behind him stretched fertile fields and thriving settlements powered by human agricultural techniques that required no advanced technology when we arrived here 5 years ago. This world was considered uninhabitable. He reported the soil was full of aggressive bacteria. The native plants were toxic to most galactic species, and the atmospheric conditions were challenging. But human colonists established thriving communities using traditional food preservation methods. The commander showed images of underground storage facilities where human colonists aged their food. Using local soil bacteria, they had created sustainable ecosystems that not only fed their population but actually improved the planetary environment by introducing beneficial microorganisms. What you call contamination, we call partnership. Commander Park continued, "Human survival depends on working with natural biological processes rather than fighting against them. This has allowed us to establish colonies on worlds that other species cannot even visit safely." The Emergency Council chamber buzzed with urgent conversations in dozens of languages as delegates began to process this new information. The humans were not biological weapons, they were ultimate survivors who had turned decay itself into a tool for conquering hostile environments. Dr. Kim returned to the main display with more revelations that challenged everything the assembled civilizations thought they knew about survival and colonization. Human food techniques were being studied by xenobiologists throughout the galaxy as examples of advanced ecological engineering. Our fermented foods contain billions of beneficial organisms that help establish healthy ecosystems wherever humans settle, she explained. When other species talk about terraforming planets with massive Technological projects humans simply plant gardens and start aging cheese. The final revelation came when Earth scientists revealed that human exploration had actually prepared the way for other species to colonize difficult worlds. Human bacterial partners had been quietly transforming soil and atmospheric conditions, making hostile planets more suitable for